And again, the fact is, this isn't a uniform path. So this wasn't EF4, from inception all the way to finish. They're looking along the path and they can find different areas of damage.
Yeah, and in this case, it essentially comes down to one home.
Yeah.
That was a well-built, newer two-story home with standard construction that was completely wiped off its foundation. But before that, it was, debarking trees, and before it got to I-57, kind of peaked out a little bit, went through a little bit of lesser damage that was indicated. Then this was the core of the damage, but it was one isolated spot. So it's kind of like hurricanes. If you have a Cat 5 hurricane, it's one very small area that gets Category 5 winds. Now, this is not measuring winds. This is assessing damage and then estimating what the wind speeds are that probably produce that damage based on the type of structure and the type of damage that was seen.
So here we start earlier in the path. EF1 damage was noted here, and the National Weather Service in Paducah did share some of that damage. So here you are looking at, not a stone or brick house, Dr. Knabb, suffering significant damage, but also not leveled.
Right, and if this was an even stronger structure, it would have been damaged less. So this maybe looks like more than EF1, but you have to factor in the strength of the structure.
Absolutely. All right, so we take this farther off to the east. Now this is where we get into the heart of the EF3 and EF4 damage. You point out that it is just one house, one area here where that storm peaked at that EF4 damage.
Yeah, so again, this was a two-story home. Newer construction, kind of standard construction, not the highest end, but certainly not poorly constructed, and it is completely wiped off the foundation. Now, this isn't just EF4. This is high-end EF4. I mean, greater than 200 miles an hour is EF5. This was damage that equates to 190, so this is pretty high on the EF4 scale.
Yeah, and we look over here at some of the damage. Obviously, lowest level, most interior room wasn't going to help you here. Over here, we've got, it looks like the building exploded, even some of the plumbing pulled up. So this was an intense tornado.
The only way to survive this tornado, if you're in that home, is to be in a bona fide safe room that can provide near absolute protection up to EF5 or be in a basement.
Absolutely.
You have to look at how the building was constructed to then give it a damage rating, which feeds into an estimate of the wind speed.
Yeah, then we take the evolution a little farther. So now we're dealing with that wider stretch of EF3 damage. This is, again, the site of that damage that allowed them to deduce that we still had an EF3 tornado about, 3/4 of a mile away.
Yeah, and this is certainly, fairly common of EF3 damage, with a lot of the exterior being significantly damaged, but not all the exterior walls down.
Absolutely. We get you some more before and afters here. Before, you're looking at that home. By the after, the garage is gone. This was EF2 damage here from the National Weather Service Paducah's survey.
And look at the significant damage on this side of the home, but the lowest level, most interior room would have worked in this case. So, most tornadoes, and in fact, most tornado damage, even with EF4s and 5s, is not EF4 and 5. And so lowest level, most interior room works in the vast majority of cases.
Yeah, because this EF4 tornado, so again, somebody who lived, further west in the path did not survive any. Before the break, we were talking with the commissioner for New York City's Emergency Management Office about what changed in New York since Ida's devastating floods back in 2021. I want to continue that conversation now because this truly was one of those game-changing hurricanes for how we treat storms, especially once they are inland, and how we prepare for them.
Yeah, so it was really important for us to talk to the commissioner in New York City to find out, what laws have changed. Some have, what procedures in New York City emergency management have changed, because that's why we're talking about game-changing storms that are in some ways benefiting us today in terms of we are applying some lessons learned from those past storms. But Ida has at least two major chapters to learn things from: the Gulf Coast part and the Northeast U.S. part, because this made landfall as a major hurricane. Now, Ida benefited from things that we learned and did from Katrina, because the storm surge in Ida would have been so much worse if we hadn't built that risk reduction system around New Orleans after Katrina. So there was 14 feet of storm surge, but we only lost one person in the surge.
So here we learned from a past storm to improve. However,
I want everybody to realize, again, that Ida was not a hurricane in the Northeast. You did not go through Hurricane Ida in the Northeast. This was the remnant moisture interacting with a mid-latitude weather system, but that doesn't mean we didn't see it coming.
Right.
Yeah.
We knew it was coming. High risk day that day for flash flooding right over one of the most, if not the most populated part of the country. So we saw the devastating effects then that came from that.
Yeah, so one thing that I hope can change in Ida for the Northeast, they had a high risk up for portions of the Northeast big cities. Could we proactively evacuate people from riverside communities that are very vulnerable, targeted? And could we proactively close schools and roads for that day, knowing it's going to be high risk? So when you think of Ida and Helene, both were high risk days identified the day before, and we lost a lot of lives. We got to start doing things to change the game for future storms by proactively taking steps.
And I guess that's the question. You know, we should.
Flash flooding, landslides, whether it's in a mountainous area or an urban area, that it happens on short notice and you can't do anything about it in advance. But the Weather Prediction Center is high risk, you know, in situations like that.
You had mentioned upgrading like on high risk days, including like a watch of more, you know, like we do PDS type situations with tornadoes. That could be something to think about, because I mean, these particular storms, Helene and Ida, you know, they were bad at the coast, but they will be remembered more so for their flooding. They had almost 1,000 miles away.
Well, it really gets people to act differently. I think we need officials to close things the day before.
Sometimes you have to force folks' hand. You know, in other tropical news, today NOAA did release their seasonal outlook for this year's Atlantic Basin season, and the high activity era in the basin does continue, calling for another season with above average.
And here at the Weather Channel, we're fortunate to have you, the former director of the National Hurricane Center, as our hurricane expert. Dr. Knabb, what do you make of this preseason forecast, and what does it mean for people living in hurricane-prone areas?
Well, it's another year with the absence of El Nino. El Nino, the warmer than average water temperatures in the eastern and central Pacific, they're going to be the Atlantic waters that are warmer than average. I think we're setting up very similar to last year.
Yeah, so again, active, but as you pointed out, active or not, it only takes one. So we've got it, and now we're closing in on the season. I mean, Memorial Day weekend tells us it's time. When we look at those ENSO patterns, obviously what you mentioned, neutral or La Nina, lead to active years.
Especially majors.